his book, Profiles of the Future, an inquiry into the limits of the possible, Arthur C. Clarke wrote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and so it is, mapping the years that have led to the present." We can say that what we have imagined, we have accomplished, and continue to expand. Welcome to Metaverse Unlimited, the first international two-day forum by Translucia. My name is Gandhi Leopairod. Once again, it is my honor to be your guide for the second and the final session of this wonderful journey we embarked upon yesterday. The intention of this forum is to extend your perspective on the endless possibilities that this technological evolution has to offer. We truly believe that Metaverse is for everyone. And we at Translucia are working tirelessly to ensure that unlimited possibility found within Translucia will drive positive impact. Wrapping up our day one, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes the whole humanity to raise AI, said Jean Lim just yesterday. We did talk about the virtual identity. We heard the broad spectrum of the opportunities in Metaverse, the MetaMe, and many more. But also the roadmap of technology that come into the Metaverse as of today. The way we see it is 2x2 metrics. We have two axes, one denotes hardware, the other is software. At the two ends of each spectrum are open and limitless system and design. If we could agree on the standards for the interconnectivity and interoperability, we have plunged headfirst into the infinity of possibilities that is the Metaverse. Join me, our five distinguished global experts from diverse backgrounds, along with our five speakers from yesterday. The collective aspiration has been to engage in sense-making and co-creating a contextual understanding of this technological evolution. Once again, we'll be charting our course and navigating our way through how the Metaverse will transform life as we know it. Our speakers will be connecting with us from all around the world and sharing their expert thoughts on the way in which Metaverse will transform how we live, work, learn, play, and move, reshaping our everyday life, society, and extension, our economies. Allow you to give you the brief rundown of our star-studded speakers list for today. Starting us off is Professor Jeremy Bellinson, Founding Director of Stanford University Virtual Human Interaction Lab. Next is Dr. David Bray, Principal at Lead Do Adapt Ventures, Distinguished Fellow at the Systemson Center and the Atlantic Council. This five-star chat will be followed by Ashley Cassavant, Executive Director at Responsible AI Institute Canada. And then we have Not Senawi Chata Methi Wong, Co-founder and Computational Design Director at Desire Synthesis. Closing out will be Shajay Bhushan, a Computational Design Research Group and Associate Director at Zaha Hadid Architects. I hope this brief rundown has given you the tiniest glimpse into the rich content and insightful conversation that we have lined up for you. Before I welcome our keynote speaker onto the screen, I would like to emphasize our vision of Translucia and why we believe that our forum will inspire people around the world to collectively join our Metaverse initiative. We envision Translucia to be the place where imagination becomes reality, the place everyone is dreaming for. Let me guide you through the 4 levels of Translucia. Level 1, Central Translucia, Central Hub of Limitless Opportunities. Step into the central hub of limitless opportunities for all generations under the theme of Happiness Center. This is the place where you will find that all of your interests, dreams, and what you are reaching for will become real. Level 2, the pillars of nature. Key compelling ecosystem to be discovered and explored. Here you find fascinating ecosystem, large flora and fauna from across the continent. Most of them never seen before but waiting to be discovered and explored. Level 3, nature's true home. The hidden realm of nature's wonders and enchantment will be revealed when the mission of nature conservation is accomplished. This is a special world where you can choose your destiny as nature's guardian. And lastly, level 4. Beyond boundless, the land where happiness becomes immortal. A place where your mind and soul will find rest and be lifted by those you love and trust. We envision ourselves as the bridge between the real and the virtual world, where we drive positive impacts that matter to all. Translucia will contribute to balanced society and the business economy by transforming how we live. And according to Dr. Shawanwat Ariyavararom, CEO and founder of TNB Media Global Thailand, like other metaverses, Translucia is an integration of advanced technologies, imaginations, and creativity. Unlike other metaverses, Translucia focuses on creating happiness not only from external sources, but also internally from one's mind and body. Translucia is driven by an engine that we envision will exchange goodness into prosperity, wellness, and ultimately happiness. Translucia defines goodness as being good to others, to the world, and to yourself. By doing so, we at Translucia aim to change the traditional definition of P and L from profit and loss to purpose and legacy. The purpose of our forum is to catalyze a collective effort in driving the metaverse for good, since we believe that no legacy is as rich as the happiness of the people. Join me to welcome our first keynote speaker for tonight. Our opening speaker is Professor Jeremy Bellinson, the author of the bestseller Experience on Demand. He is the world's leading authority on virtual reality, head of Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab, a cutting-edge research center on human behavior in immersive environments. Professor Bellinson studies the psychology of virtual and augmented reality, primarily focusing on how virtual experiences lead to changes in perceptions of self and others. His talk is on VR for the better world, how virtual experience transforms empathy, environmental conservation, education, and health. So we'd like to welcome you, Professor Bellinson. Hello. Whenever you're ready, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much for having me to this amazing event. It's great to be a part of this metaverse movement that you guys are getting behind and supporting. It's great to be one of the speakers among so many amazing colleagues. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Jeremy, and for 25 years, I've been studying the psychology of virtual reality. Today, what we're going to do is we are going to discuss specific applications in education, climate change, empathy, and health. So when I first started using virtual reality, the headsets cost more than my automobile. They were very rare. There was only a couple hundred in the world. Now we have tens of millions of these headsets across the planet, and they are much more affordable, a few $100s US. However, for many people that think about the metaverse and virtual reality, you may be like my grandfather, who's now 96 years old, but in this photo, he was 91. And like many people, he tried virtual reality, and he said, boy, this sure is neat, very fun, and it's very a good experience, but I don't really get it. I don't understand what you're supposed to do in here. And so many people try virtual reality once or twice, but don't go back. And what we're going to talk about today are really good applications of how one can use virtual reality to increase well-being, to increase productivity. And the general idea is that virtual reality is not for everything. Virtual reality is for special experiences. I've come up with an acronym called the DICE acronym, D-I-C-E. Virtual reality is great for things that are dangerous in the real world, things that are impossible, things that are counterproductive, or things that are expensive. And today, what we're going to do is go through lots of examples that really show if you use virtual reality for things that are dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or expensive to do in the real world, you're then focusing on good use cases. The first thing I want to talk about is education. I'm extremely excited to be discussing a brand new class, internal metaverse that we built at Stanford University. So for the last 6 months, we've had 263 Stanford students spending hours per week, each person, in virtual reality in a metaverse that we have built to study how one can deliver education inside of virtual reality. And there are over 200,000 shared minutes of education and data of this amazing collaboration that we have built. And I want to take you through the process of this class. In March 2020, we made the decision at Stanford that we were going to shift my virtual people class, which I'd been teaching since the year 2003, that we were going to try to shift it into virtual reality. And I volunteered to teach over the summer in 2021 because that gave me 15 whole months to figure out how I can move a class from the physical classroom into immersive virtual reality with all of my students using the headsets to enter an internal metaverse. And in order to do that, I had to solve a few different problems, or we had to solve a few different problems. We had to figure out hardware. We had to pick a platform. We had to flip the classroom and create a curriculum. We had to create VR content and find VR content, and we had to think about student privacy. And I'm going to take you through each one of these and tell you how we built our internal metaverse at Stanford. And first of all, I would like to thank my incredible team to pull off this feat. It required hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours across all of our researchers and scholars and teachers of planning. And I had a really great team of people helping out on this project. Hardware, we had to buy 180 standalone headsets. Most of our students use Oculus Quest 2s. We had students using the Pico Neo. We had students using the Valve Index. We had students using their own Vive headsets. We had a variety of headsets across the class, but we bought 180 Oculus Quest 2s, and you can see a nice stack of them there. We then had to format them and get them all in the right state for the students to use, and a lot of effort. And one of the lessons we learned about our metaverse is that hardware, it took more time to prepare the headset for each student than we planned. So for those who are going to do this at home, I recommend a lot more time on formatting, charging, and delivering the headsets. That took us more time than anticipated. You have to choose a platform. People need to see one another's avatars inside of a virtual scene. And we chose the Engage platform. Engage is a platform that's it's designed around teaching and learning. And so lots of different affordances and benefits of the technology really circle around the classroom. For example, helping teachers bring content into students. There's a neat function where you can have all the students sit down by hitting a button. You can allow students' voice to carry across the room, or you can quiet them down. It's a really nice platform for teaching and learning. But the key thing about a small group discussion in VR is it maintains the space and the spatial coherence of a conversation. So when you look at this image, you can see that when one of these students turns their head and looks at another student, unlike in Zoom, where in Zoom, when somebody turns their head to the left, you don't know where they're looking. In immersive VR in our metaverse, when one student looks at another, everyone can see that that person is looking at their colleague. Or when one student walks and steps a meter closer to another student, everyone else sees that distance work. And so the difference between Zoom and immersive VR for things like discussion and collaboration is that spatial coherence of conversation is maintained. We also had to flip the classroom. So one of the things about virtual reality is if you're doing a VR course, you've got to have something to do inside virtual reality. And so in our class, we had a very nice schedule. On Sunday nights, the students would do all of the readings. They would read chapters from my book and articles from our colleagues. On Monday, we would actually do a Zoom call because there was 175 students in the class and another 90 in the second class. And for discussing the readings, you don't need to be in VR necessarily just to talk. And so for Monday, we did a big Zoom conversation. On Wednesday, all 175 of us, we did something called a VR journey. And in the VR journey, we would descend upon some place together and we would do an activity. For example, one of my favorite examples for a Wednesday journey was about health and well-being. And we went and did a meditation class. We met in a space called Evolve VR, and we had the Reverend Jeremy Nickel and Caitlin Krause, the two amazing teachers of meditation, take us through a paced breathing exercise and imagery. And it was a fantastic experience where all of the students and the teaching staff, we were together as avatars. We started on these platforms on Earth. We then went up to outer space and we looked at the Earth from a platform in outer space, and we did paced breathing and meditation. And it was an example of what you can do as a group inside virtual reality. Another example of a Wednesday journey is we would all descend upon a flat plane similar to the movie The Matrix, a plane that never ends, and all 175 of us worked together and we would build a city. We would build the architecture, we would build learning scenarios, we would do entertainment, and we would just come together and build. And so Wednesday of the flipped classroom was very active and together. Then on Thursday and Friday, we broke into small group discussions. So 7 people would go into a room and they would be together with avatars and they would discuss what they'd learned on their journeys, and they discuss what's possible in VR, and they would do group activities together, and it was kind of small group collaboration. And so a lot of effort went to taking a curriculum, which used to be in a physical classroom, and completely redesigning it and rethinking it to make it work in virtual reality. And so my advice to those who are going to try to teach in VR, it requires a drastic retooling of the curriculum. You can't just try to do what you did in the normal classroom in VR. It requires a strong rethinking it. Some things to consider. Time. So in my class, our students met a couple times a week in VR, and they did it over 10 weeks straight. And one of the things we learned is that time matters a ton in the metaverse. So by week 5, students had learned how to use their bodies and to use the interface much better than week 3. And by week 8 and 9, new social norms had emerged where people learn new ways of communicating. And a lot of people go into VR once or twice. And what we found is that if you persist and the students go, 7, 8 times, you see a lot of different types of learning and the medium becomes more natural. Thinking about location context. So in the class we just taught, we had 150 different scenes. Some were outdoors for well-being, some were indoors to foster collaboration and using different tools like chalkboards and pens, and we really varied the location. The cool thing about VR is that the classroom can be anywhere, and we've really been experimenting with which types of scenes are more conducive to good learning. Group size is very important. We learned early on that if you take 20 or 25 people and try to do a VR discussion section, it wasn't as effective as when you had 6 or 7. And so we recommend around that 5 to 7 or 8 range for discussion sections in VR. Part of that has to do with the field of view of the goggles. Really thinking about the avatar, do people need to be their own self avatars? We have experimented with looking just like yourself or with everyone wearing the same team avatar to foster unity. And again, the activities, VR is active, it's about doing. And if there's just talking going on and listening, media like Zoom work just fine for that. I would now like to shift to environmental education, a second area that shows using VR for special examples. And the notion here is that VR is special and you can do things that you can't do in the real world. And one of the first studies that we've ever run to use VR to teach climate change was run by Sunju An. She's now a professor at the University of Georgia. And what she did is she had people come in who didn't use recycled paper, people that didn't recycle as much as they should. And some people read a story about what it would be like to cut down a tree because you need to cut down trees to make paper, and recycling solves that. Other people watched a video about what it'd be like to cut down a tree. Other people still went into VR, put on the goggles, and they had a haptic device that gave them resistance, and they actually cut down a tree in VR, and they actively used their bodies. And because they weren't recycling, they did the causal act of cutting down a tree in virtual reality. And what our results showed in this study and many studies that followed is that when you cut down a tree in virtual reality, later on, you care more about the environment. You actually use less paper in the real world. And this study's been replicated. And when we talked about that DICE acronym, the counterproductive part of that acronym is if I were to teach you about deforestation by taking you to the forest and force you to cut down a real tree, that would be a very silly way to teach deforestation. VR gives you the best of both worlds. It feels like you're doing the act, but you don't harm trees along the way. The thing I'm most proud of with our environmental education is a piece called the Stanford Ocean Acidification Experience. And this is free for anyone to download on Steam or on my lab's website. And this is a 12-minute journey where you are in virtual reality and you learn about how carbon dioxide is destroying coral. You're learning about the ocean acidification process, and you become a scientist, and you're doing a scene hunt, and you're examining wildlife, and you're moving molecules around with your hand to learn the chemistry of ocean acidification. And it's something that we spent 3 or 4 years building, and we're very proud of this piece. It's a field trip in which you can put on the goggles and viscerally learn about how humans are impacting the oceans. We've done a lot of things with this experience. We've put it in classrooms all across the world and shown that it causes more learning than other types of media. But in addition to learning efficacy, it causes motivation. So here's a screenshot from the Tribeca Film Festival where this piece, the VR piece, ran for a week. And for a week, we had a line of 100 adults waiting up to an hour to do this experience, and they're learning basic chemistry. And VR causes people to want to learn because it's a medium that has awe and excitement. And you'd never see a line of 100 people waiting to look at a chemistry textbook, but because VR is engaging, it's exciting and people want to do it. This also scales. So we've put this free on Steam and Viveport and Oculus Share and other places, and it's been downloaded by half the countries on the planet. I encourage all of you to download it. It is free, and I hope you use it for your education. Finally, we do lots of work with policymakers. We've brought this experience to the United States Senate and had congresswomen and congressmen and senators go through to learn about it. We've brought this to Palau and used it as a tool to discuss policy for how Palau thinks about climate change and local tourism. And it's a great way to connect policymakers with things that would otherwise be abstract. I now want to shift from environmental education to empathy and health. And what I'm going to talk about here is work that is now 18 years old, and it's about joining two psychological theories to cause empathy. The first theory is called the contact hypothesis. So early on in the 1960s in the United States, when people were not getting along, there was segregation based on race in schools, sociologists and psychologists worked together to theorize that by having contact, by people being together and sharing a goal, by simply being in the shared physical space, that groups are going to learn to get along. So the contact hypothesis is one theory that drives this work. The second theory that drives this work is something called body transfer. And what body transfer says is that if you move your body physically in the real world, and in virtual reality, you see an avatar move with you, move synchronously, that after a few minutes, the brain treats that avatar as an extension of yourself. In other words, we treat the avatar as if it was us. And so what I'm going to show you here is research that was begun by Nick Yee in 2003. And what we'll show you is what the first subject saw in this experiment. So here you see Nick moving around in a scene. And as he's moving his body, he's just walking around this room. Now, don't laugh at my graphics. This is a very old study. He now goes up to a mirror, and you can see in the mirror he's a white male. Now, subjects for 4 minutes would turn their heads and move their hands and would do this body transfer process. And you can see there he's turning his head in the real world, and his avatar turns with him. He now bends down. We hit a button. He comes up, and we've changed him. He's now a woman of color. And what our research does is it explores when you've changed your body, you become a different race, you become a different gender, you become a different age, you become a different body shape, you occupy another person's body, and then you walk a mile in their shoes, meaning you then experience, it could be prejudice or some type of differential treatment based on who you are. And what we do is we study how these experiences of occupying a different body changes the way you think about others and changes your behavior later on. And what I want to say here, we've been running studies about VR and empathy for the last 20 years and we've run literally dozens, 30 or 40 experiments in this area. In general, virtual reality experiences tend to increase pro-social behavior and empathy towards others more than control conditions. For example, when you do role playing or when you imagine that you're someone else. However, I want to make clear that VR is just a medium. It's not a magic medicine for prejudice. It doesn't solve all the problems. It's just a tool that helps you rethink the world. And what I will talk about is a recent study. This is a study by Fernanda Herrera. And a lot of times when I talk about empathy research, people say, well, Jeremy, how long does it last? And what are the behaviors that you look at? And what I want to talk about here is Fernanda's work around another piece that's free for anyone to download on Steam. It's called Becoming Homeless. And Becoming Homeless, you learn about the situational factors that cause somebody to lose their home. So psychologist from Stanford, his name is Lee Ross. Lee was famous for coining something called the fundamental attribution error. And what the fundamental attribution error states is that when something bad happens to me, I tend to blame the situation. It wasn't my fault, it was about the situation. When something bad happens to other people, we tend to blame their character or who they are. And what Becoming Homeless is, it's a VR experience designed to shift the understanding of why one becomes homeless away from an internal factor about who they are and more about the situation. And the way this works, you start out, you get fired from your job, you're in your apartment, you're trying to make rent and you can't, you're selling things, you get evicted, you're now living in your car, and living in your car is hard, it's illegal, the police kick you out of your car, you're now trying to actually sleep on a bus at night, but while you're doing that, there's a man that's harassing you and another man that's trying to take your things. And in Becoming Homeless, it's a journey of about 8 minutes where you just really experience in an active way, this process of losing your home and trying to make do on the streets. And what Fernanda studied is we've run many experiments here. She in particular looked at a very large sample, about 500 people, and she looked at those people 2 months after they did this experience. So in the control conditions here, you either did VR or you did traditional perspective taking and role playing, or you did a 2D movie about seeing somebody face a similar journey. And what Fernanda showed is that even 2 months later, virtual reality had a more profound effect on pro-social behavior. And what she looks at is, for example, we'll hand you a petition, a referendum, and we'll ask you, are you willing to have your own personal income taxes increased to support measures for affordable housing? And what Fernanda demonstrates here is that VR causes this behavior change even 2 months later, more than the control conditions. There's another piece that you're all welcome to download. It's called Thousand Cut Journey. And Thousand Cut Journey is the genius of Courtney Cogburn. She's a professor at Columbia University where she studies race and health. And in Thousand Cut Journey, you become Michael Sterling. He's a Black male, and you do body transfer where you become Michael in front of a virtual mirror, and you then experience discrimination as an elementary school child in school, then as a teenager in an interaction with the police where you get pulled over and frisked while your white friend does not. And then finally, you do a job interview and the person interviewing you doesn't even see you in the room, doesn't even look at you. And it's designed to show as an educational piece the systemic aspects of racism and how race is a thing. Racism is a thing that happens throughout one's lifestyle if you're Black and at many points. And this is a piece that premiered at the 2019 Tribeca Film Festival. Again, this is Courtney Cogburn's genius. I collaborated with her to help her build this, but we've now used this with many organizations, whether it's companies or governments or even universities. It's a nice augmentation to diversity training. The final example I will talk about is about using VR to increase empathy to yourself. And so we can talk about well-being and how you can be a better person towards others. But there's a whole other line of research which uses VR to increase empathy to you, but in the future. And so this is research by Hal Hershfield. And what Hal's studies do is they try to get people to defer gratification. So it turns out it's very easy to imagine pleasure soon. All of us can imagine this big meal we're going to have or a nice bottle of wine we'll have later on. What's harder to imagine is pain farther down in the future, 20, 30 years later. And what Hal's research shows is that how can you get people to think about the future and defer gratification now? And what Hal did is he brought subjects in and we built their avatars, we scanned their bodies, and some subjects saw themselves just how they were in the real world. And then other subjects saw an aged version of themselves, their future selves. And so the subjects would be 20 years old, they'd see themselves in the mirror as 70 years old. And the idea was, can you have this visceral connection to one's future self? And now the context that we initially looked was about retirement savings. In the United States, people who are in their 20s are not putting any money in the bank. And what we're facing is a crisis because people are going to be in poverty now 50 years from now because they simply aren't saving money. So what can you do to get someone who's 20 years old not spend their money on something fun tomorrow, but putting in a savings account so that they'll be healthy and happy when they are 70 years old? And so Hal gave them the option. You can have some money now, or if you put it in a savings account, you can have more money later. And what our research has shown over about 10 to 15 studies across a few different papers is compared to just about any control condition people have tried, when you viscerally meet your future self, either in virtual reality or even on a 2D screen, you put more money in savings. It causes that deferment of gratification. And there is a nice application of this that we've built with Bank of America. Bank of America uses the webcam to create a future self from a simple moving around in front of a computer. And now if you go to open a Bank of America account, they will ask you, do you want to do what's called face retirement? And if you answer yes, they'll build a version of your future self. And then as you're making banking decisions, every single financial decision you make, your future self will be staring at you. The more money you put into retirement savings, the happier your future self gets. And this has been very popular with customers. And in a new study that Hal Hershfield just published fairly recently, a large-scale study in Mexico has shown that it's increasing the amount of people, the amount of retirement savings that people put in for their future well-being. To conclude, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored to be a part of this group. And once again, I really am thrilled about the work that's going on with this amazing conference, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bellinson. This is so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing us from the Bay Area. Well, I don't know, if I want to look at myself, the future me, I probably want to see something that looked like this as of today. I can't believe that Metaverse can teach us or frame our behavior as a positive way, from environmental reconstruction to financial literacy. This is so wonderful. It's something that we can explore even more. Well, think about how the younger generation, especially during this pandemic, have become more accustomed to talking through with or to machines more than other humans. Well, my daughters for one, yeah, they've been online, pretty much every day and all the time. But I'm encouraged by research such as the ones by Jeremy as well, that I know I'm not alone when they say I'm worried a little bit about our children will grow and develop in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous VUCA world. The interdisciplinary development of technology and human sciences offer us hope for the futures of our children, our generation, and beyond. The application within Metaverse can help us so much. The research will explore relationship between imagination, computation, and human expressions. Next up, I would like to continue our conversation on the Metaverse and how the technologies can improve lives and communities, and also the global connections. Dr. David Bray joining me live from Washington, D.C. Hello, David. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you. It's great to see you in the Metaverse.
Great to see you again as well. How's everything over there?
Here, it's actually surprisingly warm for December.
Is it really?
Doing well. And how about you?
It's warm as usual, but it's all good. It's been pretty good this day. We're approaching Christmas break and everything, but we'd like to see our Metaverse Unlimited Forum. We're close to a year with a memorable events and also a lot to take on from this point on. David, are you ready? It's going to be fireside chat. I know it's 25 minutes. It's not going to be enough to crack your meta brain right here, but I would try to get as much as I can from you. Is that okay?
Certainly. Looking forward to it.
Let's start it out because you've been in the space to talk about the technology and societal impact. And we would like to talk about the metaverse. How do you define metaverse?
That's a great question. So metaverse to me is taking the internet that we know, what some people refer to as cyberspace, and giving it a sense of presence and body that's just not possible through just text. I mean, even right now, two-dimensional, we've all been on different video calls and things like that. This is really giving it more of a sense of presence that might be virtual reality, augmented reality, and it also allows you to be creative in how you present yourself. As we heard already, you don't have to present yourself exactly how you look. You can choose to augment how you look. Maybe you look a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older, and maybe you don't even look human at all. And so it allows us to explore metaphor. It allows us to explore new ways of connecting with each other, building community. To me, this is an interesting sort of almost metacognition, and that's probably where metaverse is coming from, is the idea that it's actually presenting new ways in which we think about how we are relating to each other, to community, and to the planet.
But this is a great point. It's actually changing how we're relating to one another and to each other. We have been influenced by the Hollywood, culture from the dark side and the positive side, and we look at, see a lot of discussions around how we ensure the metaverse does not become the escape room per se, when it could lead to apathy or societal breakdown. What do you think about that?
So I think as we look towards the future, first and foremost, we need to recognize that there are still things in the real world we need to address. That rushing to a virtual world, the metaverse, is not going to immediately solve them. But if we think about why do we still have challenges, for example, here in the United States, we still have issues in terms of either gender discrimination, racial discrimination. There are inequities that need to be solved in the real world. If we think about why we still have those, then we can also think about how both in the real world and possibly in a virtual world, in a metaverse world, we can then think about solving those issues. And I think at the end of the day, it comes back to human beings. We have both wonderful tendencies, but we also have some not so great tendencies. I sometimes say, half jokingly, but also seriously, that if you go back to 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, most of us in our entire lifespan only ran into about 80 people, and most of them were members of our tribe. They weren't members of a different tribe. And so that created some interesting environments with selection pressures that when we play it forward to now, we're in worlds in which we meet at least 80 people on a daily basis, several of them online that are not part of our tribe. There are some bad behaviors that sometimes come to the surface because our brains have not really adapted to that new world. Doesn't mean we can't overcome it. Education is one way to overcome some of these sort of what I would call flaws in human programming, but it's not the only way. Travel experiences is a way to actually expose people to new cultures and new understanding and recognize that we're all shared humanity. But not all of us can travel. And of course, COVID has now happened with the pandemic. And so in some respects, the metaverse can be a way of sharing experiences and literally giving someone a chance to walk a mile in someone else's shoes so they have that empathy and they can experience, but only if we stop and first say, why do we still have challenges in a world of getting along? Why do we still have human conflict? Why do we still have human inequities? And if we think about that in terms of why do we have that in the real world, then how can we use this new experience that the metaverse provides us to sort of overcome those and do so with human empathy and human dignity?
Well, I like that. We can use the metaverse to be the education tools or something that we can change the tough problems in our real world like right now. Can you give a little bit more case study example or stuff that has been going on using the tools of metaverse, virtual reality to solve the social problems?
Sure. Two data points that I think are worth considering as we think about projects for the future. One, there actually have been some experiments, and this was actually done even before the metaverse was an idea. So this was just rudimentary interface where they basically had pen pals between Palestine and Israel. But they had a translation service, and they didn't reveal to these classmates that their pen pal was from another nation that may not necessarily always be seen as favorable to the other nation. And so they established pen pals, they ran this experiment for about 6 months, and then they revealed after 6 months, oh, by the way, your pen pal is a Israeli, or your pen pal is a Palestinian. And it's this idea that if we can at least first come together as humans first, and not be divided by organizational barriers such as what nation you hail from or what culture you come from or the fact that you speak a different language. This is ways of sort of helping people realize at the end of the day, we're all human. We have similar wants, similar desires, similar needs, and a similar sense of connectedness if we take the time to reflect and examine that. So that's one positive proof point. A second positive proof point, this is interesting. It comes from architecture. And I know you've had some really great speakers and you're going to have some more speaking on architecture, but Christopher Alexander, he was a famous architect that took the time to analyze spaces that gave people a sense of awe, a sense of something larger than themselves, a sense of presence. And he actually sort of identified empirically what those spaces included and how the spaces were designed. And I think this presents something that the metaverse is going to provide that isn't possible just through a text interface or a two-dimensional interface, that we can now architect spaces that do also create that sense of awe, that sense of presence or sense of joy, and we can do so empirically. And if you combine that with what the first thing I shared, which is, can you have ways that sort of transcend border? And you do so in a structured way that it doesn't necessarily spill over into bad behavior, but instead it's about realizing at the end of the day, whether you are around the world or you're just someone that's my next door neighbor, but I maybe haven't talked to you before, we are at the end of the day all humanity, and we all have a shared sense of connectedness, not just to each other, but to life on the planet and the planet as we know it.
Well, this is awesome, but it's also lead me to the next big questions. So if we refer back to globalization, has definitely been megatrend in the past few decades. And with this, most things, these are the positive and negatives. So if we talk about the growing concerns of today younger generations, is that the loss of unique identities. And this right now is actually the dawn of the metaverse and the beginning of Web 3.0. What do you think about that? What we could expect to see in the future regarding the unique identities of the people around the world?
Right. So it's worth realizing, there's a phrase that says that history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And in some respects, I almost feel like, are we in a dawn of a new Renaissance? And it's worth thinking about when we had the big Renaissance in Italy and in Europe, that was coming out of the medieval ages. And one of the things that accelerated coming out of the medieval ages into this new Renaissance of art and music, one of the things that actually accelerated that was the printing press. And so the question is the internet plus augmented reality and virtual reality technology, is that going to be sort of the new printing press? And are we going to have a new sense of digital literacy that is something more than just being able to read words, but includes digital dignity, digital empathy? And so I think we're going to have to think first about what are these sort of skills that we want people to bring? What are the norms of behavior we want people to bring to the metaverse? So it doesn't just become lowest common denominator, or it becomes a place in which people feel that they either feel uncomfortable or they feel like they don't fit in. So we need to think about how do we want to create those spaces that includes the idea of honoring someone's unique identity. Because you're right, we're about 8 billion people on the planet right now. By the end of the decade, we could be 9 billion or more. We need to think about, as globalization continues, how do we make sure we provide for people's basic needs? Not everyone on the planet actually has access to the internet yet. That's something that we need to accelerate. And the good news is, it looks like we will bring on another 3 billion people in the next 5 years if current trends continue. That's still not everybody, but that's a massive leap in a very short period of time to help connect the planet. We also need to think about how we make sure people meet their needs in the real world. And so that includes jobs. And particularly, how do we help people get to green jobs? Because that's something that we need to think about as the climate continues to change. How can we make sure that the computational power that we're using for the metaverse actually at the end of the day is net carbon, ideally negative, or at a minimum, net carbon neutral? So that's something we need to think about as well. And then finally, as we move forward, we need to think about with unique identity, your data, specifically your digital data, should be something that you have choice and control over. When is it used? When is it shared? And when is it kept private? I think that's a very strong value. And the good news is we have early efforts afoot. There are these things called data trust or data co-ops. And the idea there is individuals form a association. It could be a community association. It could be an association in terms of they care about a certain cause. Maybe they care about helping with early stage cancer research, or they care about helping to inform what's happening at the local level in their community with climate change. And they choose to share their data as part of a data trust or a data co-op for these purposes. And then that allows it to actually be used either for cases of helping construct a metaverse world, or helping to construct an AI system that's then going to make sense of that data and maybe find new therapeutics for cancer research, or find new ways of dealing with what's happening with climate change at the local level and the global level. But it's the idea that the community comes together and data is done with them as opposed to them. And I think that's a really big shift, because if we're not careful, we'll rush into the metaverse and we will lose a sense of digital dignity, lose a sense of both individualism as a person, but individualism also in the ability to choose when your data is shared. So I'm really excited about those efforts that are thinking about, as we move forward, how data trust and data co-ops can help sort of allow people to have a choice and locus of control with their individual data as part of a larger collective.
Wow, I think you touched a lot of points that I actually have, the questions for that. But let's start with the one you touched a little bit about inclusiveness of this technology. Right now, once again, it's a very early day, of the metaverse and Web 3.0. How we could ensure the inclusiveness, or, I mean, long-term problem for many countries about inequality and how we can access and gain into the benefit of this new technology. What do you think about that?
100%. Inclusiveness is going to be key. And again, this is where I emphasize what I mentioned a little bit earlier, that we want to make sure we don't take the lack of inclusiveness or the problems we have in the real world, we don't just carry them and maybe make them even worse in the metaverse. I think that is so important. And that requires sort of thinking about, well, why do we still have these problems in the real world? Why do we still have either gender disparities or racial disparities, or even, believe it or not, we know, for example, empirically, it's been shown that the taller you are, the more likely that you're paid more. And maybe that makes sense if you're a basketball player, but for most professions, height really shouldn't matter. And this gets to, again, that unfortunately, evolutionary pressures in the past and natural selection pressures have created sort of unconscious biases that play themselves out in human societies. And we're not alone. You can go to our relatives in terms of chimpanzees and bonobos, and they also unfortunately have some maladapted tendencies as well. The only difference is, of course, we are tool wielders that are literally changing our environment, both at the physical level, but also the digital level. And so can the metaverse allow people who may not recognize that they do have these unconscious biases, that they do have these discriminations, that they consciously say, oh no, I'm not one of those people, but here, let's actually show you that you do have this, and that can help make you aware of your biases so that you approach things differently? Or can it actually allow you to actually have a mile and walk a mile in someone else's shoes and say, do you know what it would be like if you had a completely different experience? We heard earlier from the speaker about how it would be like to lose your job and to become homeless. Most of us, unfortunately, who have not had the chance of being homeless, we don't necessarily have the same empathy that sometimes it's circumstances. It's a series of bad situations, and through no fault of the person's own, they're in a situation where they need help. And so I raise that because if used well, this technology can help us have more digital empathy. If we don't think about it, or if we rush in, we may end up that we may have the same challenges we currently have in social media, where there's trolls, there's griefers. If we're not careful, we'll bring that in. But I'm very sure that with the intentionality and the fact that you've assembled people both yesterday and today to have these conversations, that we can definitely do better with the metaverse as long as we're intentional about digital dignity and having empathy in this new world, these new worlds, plural, that we're creating.
Recently, we've been talking about the creative economy or creator economy. So what we've been living in the past decade of Internet 2.0. So we've seen that a lot of jobs has been invented that we've never known before. What about going on forward in the future with the Internet 3.0 or the metaverse? What do you think about the job opportunities out there, and how can we prepare?
Yes, so I think, again, it starts with the founding building blocks of data. The idea that data is fundamental and that we all have the ability both to produce data about ourselves and choose what we do with it, but then also to do creative things with data, whether it's to create art, whether it's to create new engineering, new marvels, whether it is to create new therapies. And collectively, if we pull our data together, maybe we can find new ways of detecting cancer of different types in the body, or find new ways of dealing with mental health, and maybe new ways of dealing with it online. I raise that because if we're looking for what the real value of this world we're going into with what some call Web 3.0 or decentralized web and the metaverse, it's thinking about making sure that data is something that people have choice and some locus of control over, as opposed to it's just in the hands of a few. I'm very worried if we're not careful, whether it be corporations or countries, that they may sort of centralize and pull all the data together and not allow people to be creative with it and choose what they want to do with it. And that would be sort of a lost sense of job creation and opportunities. The other thing is that we do need to be aware of, we obviously are experiencing climate pressures. And so we need to think about how we can do green job creation and do so in a decentralized fashion in places that may not have even seen job creation, much less green job creation. So I'm talking about rural areas of the world. I'm talking to places that may be inner cities that may have fallen under hard times that could need this as well. And so thinking about how you empower people, that includes thinking about not just the skilling and providing the education to do so, but it may need to require thinking about how do you provide financial capital and other ways of sort of motivating people at the local level to create not just green jobs, but do so in a way that is uplifting for the entire community. So I'm excited if we do some intentional planning as well as some intentional experiments, because we are going to have to experiment with how this decentralized approach could be a way to actually deal with the fact that in some respects, nation states are mattering less. And at the same time, we don't want to see the swing of power go to a new sort of singular entity. The last thing we want is only five companies on the face of the planet, and that's it, or even less. What we really want to think about is how data, as well as job creation and empowering communities, can be solutions to individual well-being, community health, and ultimately the health of our planet too, as we move forward.
You mentioned about data, where people should be able to control their own data. So I automatically linked with the decentralizations. Do Metaverse and decentralization all linked and always related, or is this inseparable in any form of technology or even the concept?
That's a really great question. So I think at the end of the day, Herb Simon had a phrase, which is the sciences of the artificial, that we can choose the norms and the rules we want to bring to bear. And a lot of times we don't stop and pause and realize that rules we have in the real world are simply that. They're artificial rules that we have chosen to do. And I mentioned a little bit earlier where I was talking about, are we on the cusp of a new renaissance, very similar to the transition between the medieval ages in Europe to what was the Renaissance in Europe. If you had been in the medieval ages, as you've been at the very end, one, chances were you were probably a farmer, and your father was a farmer, and your father before your father, and et cetera, et cetera. Your parents, for several generations, had been farmers. You probably didn't know how to read. You could not legally own land, and you could not engage in currency transactions. But then the Renaissance changed all that. It created a new source in which people could own land that previously hadn't. They could engage in commerce, and they could actually do things beyond just farming. They could do commerce in terms of trade. They could do things in terms of art and music production. They could do actually pursuit of knowledge and science too. And so I think if we think about the new norms we want to have, and maybe we do some experiments in the virtual world, in the metaverse, and then we bring them back to the real world. And we recognize that these are not two inseparable worlds. They're actually overlapping worlds, whether it be virtual reality or augmented reality. They overlay, and our identities overlay themselves. We can do some experiments that involve architecture and space. We can do some architectures that involve bringing together communities and data. We can even think about a world in which it's not just going to be human entities anymore. It's not just going to be people presenting themselves in interesting ways. It may actually be a combination of chatbots taken to the next level. You may actually be interacting with AIs and digital assistants too. But as we think about that, we can do new ways of experimenting that empower people to have their individual choice, to have their individuality, but also to think about how we do collective uplift in terms of human health and planetary health, as well as ecosystem health, which is so essential for the future going forward.
We discussed about a lot of stuff that is so new, never happened before. If I'm going to ask, in the lens of policymakers, regulators per se, what role should they take? Should they step forward? Should they wait and see? What do you think?
That's a good question. So I often use the word, and I've served in government, and I've also served in the private sector too. And I raise that because I use the word governance matters. So the governance does not necessarily mean it's something that governments have to do, but you do need some governance, else you do devolve into anarchy, or worse, a place where it's just trolls and griefers. And we've seen that unfortunately happen in other cases before about a decade, and that's something to be aware of. We also shouldn't be surprised that some of the other traits of human nature carry over too. Misinformation, disinformation have always been around. Even here in the United States, our own John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, two of our sort of founders, engaged in disinformation with each other too, and that was back in the 1800s. The only difference is that we've now democratized things, and that allows good things to happen, such as personalized medicine, or the fact that you do have more computational power in your pocket than the NASA moon landings did several decades ago. But it also allows challenging things to happen too, that people can do bot farms, or they can do disinformation spread. And so as we embrace these new technologies, I think the role of people that are thinking about governance, that could be regulators in government, but it also could be caring nonprofits or caring groups that are even from the for-profit sector that want to make sure these markets are uplifting. As they think about governance, we need to think about what are the things we don't want to have happen. What are the things that are essentially things that we want to make sure we have a strict line that makes sure we don't pass over. And that can include making sure we don't have discrimination or we don't have other issues that happen online. The other thing to think about as we move forward to this new world is think about, new ways of I won't say regulating, but governing at collective speed. And that's where, again, I go back to the only way we'll be able to do this is if we actually empower people at the local level to have some choice in their data, to choose what's done with it. And then that bubbles up to the global level as well. So I think we're going to have to come up with new ways of governing. And I won't say new ways of regulating, but new ways of doing the effective governance at speed necessary across the private sector, the public sector, and ultimately across global communities for these series of new worlds we're creating.
We always discuss or debate, how fast this should go on. I know the governance body will be very important. Some self-regulated, in terms of associations and a group of people that are working on this together. So it could be, the responsible guideline or something like that to work on forward. David, I have a questions. That is very interesting here. How can these technologies improve connections around the world and how we relate to one another, both as humans to humans, as well as humans to the planet as a whole? What's your takes about that?
Sure. So right now, we obviously are facing some significant issues in terms of there's climate change, but there's also increasing geopolitical tensions. There are tensions between countries and things like that. So I would love to see some metaverse experiments, and I know there's been some other early examples that allow people to see what humans are doing, but to make it more like that people can on a regular basis feel how the planet is changing, and not just feel like, oh dear, this is something that's disconcerting, but then what can you do about it? What can we do in terms of creating green jobs faster? What can we do to actually make it so that it's more attractive for people to choose going for green communities and architecting green communities in the alternative? Same thing with geopolitics. I would love to have sort of exchange programs, the equivalent of virtual exchange programs, where maybe you don't travel physically anywhere different, but we're doing exchanges between different countries that historically have not talked to each other all the best or are at tension with each other. So pen pals. And then lastly, we were talking a little bit earlier, the question you had asked just a moment ago about new ways of governing. I'd love to see a professionalization of people in the metaverse. And what do I mean by professionalization? Well, back almost 1,000 years ago, there began to be a problem that with the Renaissance and as the medieval ages ended, you could actually travel to a town that didn't know you. And so if you showed up and you claimed you were a doctor, or you showed up and you claimed you were a lawyer, how would they know for sure that you were not only, you had the know-how to do so, that you were competent, but you'd actually were looking after their best interests, that you'd taken a code of ethics? And that's when professional societies arose. In the medical society, you have to take a code, a Hippocratic oath, that you are going to do the best to care of the patient. There's also legal ethics as well. I'd love to see maybe we do in the metaverse sort of societies that hold their members accountable to a code of ethics that's inclusive, that's uplifting, that actually values human dignity, but also planetary dignity as well. And it's something that we actually hold each other accountable to. And the nice thing about professional societies is they do sort of then, as a result, they have a common set of both demonstrating knowledge of and experience in, but also interest in serving something beyond just the individual. And so I raise that because if we think about how we're going to move forward in a connected way, we may need to think about both a metaverse code of ethics and maybe a professionalization of that code of ethics as a way to move forward as global governance versus what we've done in the past.
Fantastic. Well, I get this is a totally awesome point. I have final question here, David. What is the role of architecture as well as psychology in helping inform how we best use these technologies?
Yes. So again, we are physical creatures, and that's a result of hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, and even before then, evolution of life on this planet. So we are used to interacting with our spaces in certain ways. And physical spaces can create a sense of either chaos, which is the last thing we want, or they can create a sense of awe or tranquility or connectedness. And so I would love to see experiments in the metaverse that create that sense of shared awe, shared joy. And that may include the equivalent of, sometimes when you walk into a space that has very high ceilings, that can trigger your brain to have that sense of awe or something greater than yourself. I'd love to see experiments where we have interconnectedness between maybe people who are retired, and they may not be able to easily travel to see their younger family members, but the metaverse can bring them together for the equivalent of an extended family reunion. And what does that look like for that sort of connection? And then I'd love to have also sort of the idea that we can sort of think about it's no longer just our immediate physical neighbors that we should be connected to, but it's also our virtual neighbors that may be half a world away, have different experiences, but together we are all a shared humanity. And so if we architect these spaces well in the metaverse, we can trigger positive human emotions, including awe, joy, a sense of happiness, and do so in a way that's actually uplifting of the future beyond what we've already done on the internet.
It's always been enjoyable every time and mind-blowing every time when I talk to you, David. Thank you so much for your time today. Today you end and tonight in my end. And hopefully we'll get together, enjoy the band, and form up some work group to make sure that Metaverse will do good for our future and the next generations to come.
Thank you. I look very much forward to that mission together as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Whoa, this is mind-blowing indeed. So we see a lot of optimism to see the future of Metaverse and technology lie ahead. We had the insightful talk with David, and this is so awesome. I believe that we learned a lot from well-being, from how to reduce equality, how to even improve our behavior, to understand better into society, so even solve the problems that we have had for such a long time, like inequality and poverty and so many others, including environmental issues. So this is the opportunity that we could go together, private sector, public sector, or governance body to work together on this. Well, next up, I now would like to go to our next speaker, Ashley Cassavan, Executive Director at Responsible AI Institute from Canada. She'll be speaking on avoiding the technology pitfalls, governing principles for the metaverse. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, welcome to Metaverse Unlimited. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
This is wonderful. We'd love to hear more about what you're doing, the workable guidelines and the standard and governing issues that you are working on. So Ashley, whenever you're ready, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And yes, I'd love to speak to a lot of this, but I think that being able to listen to the work that Dr. David Bray was doing is really quite fascinating and connected to our efforts. And it's great to see that all of these different people with expertise are kind of converging around similar issues. And so maybe just to take a very quick step back, we have quite a diverse board and a diverse community when really thinking about some of the challenges that I'll discuss today. And it's quite important for us to keep in mind as I go through this, who we have involved, both the organizations that are really at the forefront of developing different types of AI systems and deploying them to have improved service delivery. But because of some of the challenges that David was speaking about and that I'll get into today, it's really important to also then have an understanding of how public sector organizations, civil society organizations, standards bodies, and academic researchers can really help to bring light to what some of these challenges are and find ways that we can work in the future together more effectively. And so there's been a really significant interest in really thinking very much, again, in light with what David was saying, in how we're being intentional about how we're developing the technology that we're going to use now and into the future. And one of the things that I'm sure many of you that are interested in this topic have seen is the expectations of developing AI systems and the impact that they're going to have on our economy, but also given that on society. And some of the things that have been really fascinating to me over the past year is just the depth at which AI systems are integrated in many ways very seamlessly into our everyday lives. And so I find it very interesting that if we take a step back and look at how technology is being used, how AI and machine learning applications are being used, they're really into things that, as I was saying before, we don't see, like mining efforts and heating and cooling systems. And this has a lot of potential in terms of providing better services. One of the things that David was talking about was climate change. And I think that if we're really thinking about how we can save energy, having monitors constantly kind of measuring where a room is needed to be heated or cooled is something that we don't think of as being really important, but lots of energy is wasted, especially in office buildings that aren't housing that many people because of the pandemic now. So it's quite interesting, but some of the challenges that we see around this is that to some of the bias that I'm sure other speakers, but also David spoke about before, that we're seeing in current use cases right now are things like LGBTQ couples getting higher mortgage denial rates, and people in different demographic minorities getting less health care, even though they have similar medical histories, similar medical conditions, and yes, it's really quite fascinating that we can have the technologies right now that can help us to detect many different types of medical issues at a better rate than what humans can. However, when it goes wrong or it's impacting one group specifically, and we've seen this with this third example of facial recognition systems, really only recognizing people that are of lighter skin tones. And a lot of this goes to how the data that's being used to train these systems is not as diverse as it needs to be to benefit all demographics. And then a very, very familiar and I think tried and true example of where we've seen some challenges with AI systems is in things like training of chatbots, training of filtering systems for human resources, and the fact that the current nomenclature or words that we're using are then actually creating either hateful speech or making predictions that are skewing, again, to benefiting one demographic group over another. And so there's been a lot of work that's being done to really think about what those laws are that can have improved oversight over these different types of efforts. But as you can see, even from these examples, and that's why I like to just share something as simple as heating and cooling systems. When we're talking about technology and the use of AI, it's really quite expansive in terms of the different domains that it's impacting. And this stems back to my work within the public sector, where I was the Director of Data and Digital for the Government of Canada. And in that effort, was responsible for starting to think through what types of policies we need to put in place as a government to ensure that the AI systems and technologies that we're using as a key service provider to the public are doing so in a way that's going to benefit and not harm people. And with that, there was, at the same time as we were doing this work in 2018, there was an Ipsos survey that was done in Canada. And I really found the results of it quite interesting. It spoke a lot to the lack of trust that people have in AI systems, and the reasons and rationales why, as well as it broke down the different demographic groups and the support that it had. But I found this takeaway the most interesting in that while there's so many opportunities that can come from the use of these systems, the more that it matters, the more people, or the more that it could be beneficial, like in the case of healthcare, or even getting access to capital, whether that's through insurance claims or automation of insurance claims, or automating access to credit, that's where there's really less trust that can exist in the use of those systems. And we've seen a lot of reasons in the media recently and over the past few years to really understand why that is the case. And so the work that I do as the executive director now of the Responsible AI Institute, we're a nonprofit organization that is interested in advancing the use of oversight mechanisms, tools, and policies, and primarily a certification to really address some of those challenges that I just spoke about. And a lot of these efforts stem back to when I was in the Government of Canada. At that time, really in 2018 and through to 2020, there was a lot of work that was being done to think about how to respond to these challenges. Again, recognizing the vast nature and application of these systems, but also the fact that there's many, many different types of technologies that underlie these systems. And so you can just see this is a very small sample of different efforts that were done by national, international organizations to develop principles in addressing how AI systems should be built. And one of the convergences that we've seen, I would say in 2020, 2021, was that the OECD principles that were led by the AI Policy Observatory really have become these globally adopted principles. And we can see, if you look at any of those other documents that I shared on the screen previously, that a lot of the same concepts are included in those. And still work has been done by organizations like UNESCO, and they recognize these principles as part of those efforts and really build from that. So with this, they set fairly clear direction in terms of, again, addressing how these AI systems should be built so we can avoid some of those challenges that I spoke about previously. And things like benefiting people and the planet, designing in a way that respects both the rule of law and human rights, thinking about the need to be transparent and responsible. And then also thinking about this has been something that's come from other types of safety communities, is ensuring that these systems are safe and secure. And also, finally, ensuring that this is thought about through the course of the life cycle of the system, in that it is being designed, developed, and deployed in a way that is going to be accountable. And so with that, as you can imagine, starting within the work that I was doing within the Government of Canada, in order to build a policy, we really wanted to think about how this would have an impact on implementing this, the people that are going to be implementing this work. And so what we've done at the time, what we did was develop a directive called Automated Decision-Making Systems. And what was very fascinating to me was the ability to recognize that we were a small team. We only had so many subject matter experts or subject matter expertise. And so we really needed to reach out to the community. And this really started me on my path for the work that I'm doing now. And recognizing that as a nonprofit organization, we could convene a lot of really brilliant minds to think about how do we actually implement some of those principles that you just saw on the screen, again, where the communities converging. And so a lot of the work that we're doing within the Responsible AI Institute is bringing that community together to really think about what is it that we're advocating for in relation to those principles, and what are the different types of tools and education materials that are needed to address those concerns. And an assessment is a really big component of that. In the Canadian government, in addition, or a big component of the directive was an algorithmic impact assessment. And in that, I found when working with practitioners to implement this policy, that it was a quite useful tool to be able to help people understand the different types of processes or procedures that they should put in place in order to mitigate any of those challenges that we saw earlier. And I think that a concept that's become really interesting to me is thinking about how conformity assessments or certification can really help to address some of those challenges, so that practitioners aren't left guessing or going through things like checklists in an inconsistent manner from one another, that there's a lot more standards and rules and frameworks to help to guide and support that. And so our work now is really focused around thinking about those consistent ways to build an implementation framework for those principles that I shared, as well as a lot of the work from the standards organizations that really help to inform those efforts and are building very specific standards around those efforts. And so, as you can see here, when we're thinking about mitigating the challenges that are seen and really trying to adhere to those OECD principles, we are focused on that oversight of AI systems recognizing that, as we heard previously, that data is a big component of those, a big input into the AI system, that the tool itself or the model or set of models can really operate in a variety of different ways, whether that be chatbots or whether that be decision-making systems, whether that be optical or image recognition systems. Those are all kind of bucketed under this set of technologies. And so they all sort of have different and unique challenges associated with them when thinking about how to apply these concepts and rules. And then what we're doing that I found the most useful throughout my policy efforts is, again, going back to that community of experts and really getting these different perspectives, like I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, to ensure that how we're thinking about providing this oversight not only makes sense in different domains, but it's comprehensive from thinking about that from different types of expertise that would come into play. And architecture is a great example of that. But many think about this as a technology problem and aren't really thinking about it from the perspective of legal or human rights all the time, and having ethicists at the table alongside technologists. So by bringing all of those different perspectives together, what lies beneath this, what I will say is a rolled up or clean version of what those implementation criteria are, then we've established a really comprehensive framework with requirements underneath that, and an assessment tool to help to get that consistency that I was talking about earlier. And that's really setting the foundation for our efforts to build out a certification. And we're doing this in partnership with our members. We're focused right now in health, finance, and thinking about the implications of human resource systems. And so we're testing that out with several different of our members and their specific use cases now. And so as you've heard from me previously, this idea of building with the community, going through an accredited process that's working with these standards organizations to ensure that there's an independent and authoritative and consistent framework is quite fundamental to what we do. And then working with third-party auditors to actually review that, that system. And so it creates a separation between us that have built that framework and then the people that will actually go out and audit around these different types of systems. And I've been very inspired by other certification programs, most notably LEED for improving the engineering and environmental design of buildings, of physical buildings. And even though it's not exactly the same, one of the things that I really like about, and I've been fortunate to have discussions with the founder of it, Rob Watson, and he really thought about this work as behavioral transformation. So wanting to adhere to principles of improving building design for achieving environmental goals, really then thinking about how to shift behavior. These certifications are really more of a maturity model. So it's not a compliance, did you do this or did you not do this, but it is really trying to transcend and move towards best practices and behaviors. And so I'll just end with saying that our efforts are really important to be recognized as part of a broader ecosystem. And so what we do is this standards and governance component, and that is really quite dependent on training, on awareness initiatives, on a lot of the standards and technology experimentation that I spoke about earlier, and a lot of research that's gone into thinking about what some of these key challenges are, identifying the root causes for those problems, and then trying to find ways to address them. And this is being done both in governments, like in the Government of Canada, we're trying to think about, as I said, government's use of AI systems and how that's improving and providing services to Canadians, but also in terms of research at numerous academic institutions have really been thinking about many different aspects of research. And that goes all the way to things like bias tests and explainability tests that you would have seen were part of the framework we have, are kind of very hot topics right now, I would say, in terms of thinking about how we can approach and address some of these challenges. But what is really interesting, if you think back to the diagram before, is that all of these really need to be working with one another. So not only us within an ecosystem, learning from other organizations, but also really thinking holistically about all aspects of explainability, bias, accountability measures, thinking about those system operations all together so that we can have a comprehensive view with those different expertise in play. If you have other questions, we're always happy to connect and answer those. As I said, we're a nonprofit organization. We have an open community. You can join us or you can connect to us anyway, but we do have, if you're interested in this, this discussion and this work that we're doing, a Slack channel where we have all of our subject matter expertise that are available to share this information and really work to continue to advance those use cases that I was talking about. And even though we've started with those, we do intend to expand beyond that as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Thank you so much that doing what you're doing is help secure the security and safety for us as a whole. Thank you so much once again, and you have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Totally. We totally need more people like you, Ashley, and to working on this to ensure the security, the safety for all stakeholders. This technology evolves so fast, so quickly. So we need someone, a group of people working together, understand the technology, and work all around it to prevent any negative impact that might happen. I think David and Ashley agrees on a lot of things. Smart regulation regarding emerging technology that are pre-established can protect members of society and drive innovation. What the path forward is not deregulation or prohibitions, but smart proactive standards that establish a framework for both public protection and innovation growth. Reflecting on some of the key talking points made by our speakers yesterday and today, well, I can say that we all agree on participatory formation of standards that will not only enable, but also foster interconnectivity. This will allow a technology to talk to each other. This will ensure that no single entity can monopolize the new frontier that we are proactively co-creating. I think this point is very important. We need to ensure that participation and inclusiveness, not to let anyone monopolize on this space. On one hand, we require policymakers, architects of strategies, and frameworks that will ensure well-being for all. On the other hand, we require creatives, designers, engineers, those that can work around the assets and objects that will be interchangeable and applicable. I'm sure that it will not surprise you when I say that I have lined up not only one, but two such creative for you today. First, I would like to hearing from Kunnat Senawi Chata Meti-wong, co-founder and computational design director at Desire Synthesis based here in Thailand. His talk will be about encoded environments, how computational design reimagine architecture, engineering, and construction through the metaverse. Hello, Nat.
สวัสดีครับ
สวัสดี
Hi, Dr.
ค่ะ
Gandhi.
Good to see you, and thank you so much for staying up late for us.
Okay.
I know you have prepared a whole load of information for us tonight. Let us hear from you. So, Nat, whenever
cool.
you're ready, the stage is yours.
Okay. Okay, I'm ready. Let's. Is it my slide up?
Oh, good.
Okay. So, for the encoded environment, I will categorize it into 5 segments. It will be generative sandbox, mass customization, digital twin, both before and during the construction, and also about adaptive virtual environment. In each section, I will go through international firm example and also an example work from our firm. So before we start, let's say who we are. So we are a firm doing computational design and digital fabrication. So for computational design, our major interest is in machine learning, advanced curvilinear geometry, and interactive design. For digital fabrication, we are interested in additive and subtractive manufacturing. This thing I will talk a little bit about it later. So first, what is computational design in AEC industry? First is a design method that you design from the genotype, not the phenotype, if I use the biology terms. So basically you design something from logic and algorithm instead of the appearance of it. So the main threads of computational design is adaptive and malleable. For example, if you design a tree, right? As the tree can adapt to the external condition. Let's say the sun. If the sun go toward that way or that way, it will lean itself toward a certain direction. Architecture also will have those ability that I will show you later on. And computational design also scaleless. These beautiful vases from Sangha design, the algorithm that design it can be used to design tower facade, let's say. So especially in Metaverse, right? Because in the Metaverse is already scaleless. So it's unlike one-to-one scale of the physical world anymore. So the opportunity will be much, much more there. And computational design is also non-site specific. So if you are an architect reading about computational design, you when I talk at the other place, the question that's always come up is that why is non-site specific? It's non-site specific because you design something with the DNA, right? So coconut tree in Phuket and coconut tree in Malibu, if they are in the same phylum, they will have the same DNA. So, but they are in different places. So the look is different, the phenotype is different, and depends on the weather condition and soil condition, it will lean and grows and branch to a certain direction. That's why it's different. That's why I come up with the quotes here from Chiche Bhushan, my teacher that will speak after me, that varieties come for free, right? Because you just change the variables, right? And you've got a lot of alternative there. And in our firm, man and machine will be co-authorship of the design on the project. Because on the left side, as you can see here, right, a lot of people typing something. If you are in an AEC industry, you will know that certain drawing software, if you type a line, it will always produce you only a line, right? But if you use machine learning, like on the right side with Jimmy and Aladdin, right, it's kind of like you ask question, and Ginny will change the variables for you until you find the right solution or the right design outcome. This design method interests me because it can sometimes surpass human bias in decision making too. It's an emergent design. I will show you later about what it is. So robotic fabrication is very straightforward, right? So you build something with the help of robot. First, additive manufacturing, anything that add material into it, like 3D printed, assembling, or weaving. Subtractive manufacturing is anything that removes material, either drilling, turning, or grinding, or whatever. So what's next for these two combining together and beyond the BIM industry that we're doing now? So for us with digital twin, computational design and robotic fabrication, it will allow us to have the form file to construction projects. So we don't need a paper drawing anymore. So here's the example project from Akin Menges's ICD studio. So here they use computational design branch called biomimicry. So it's similar to part of the caterpillar, right? And the black material only added in the area that is needed is carbon fiber, is weaving with fiberglass, right? So here, as you can see here, robot fabricate something in physical world. Why in the digital world? You can also have those simulations running around. The code is running, the robot is moving like this in the screen, right? So you can see that the robot built something while the computer is still running. You can those two worlds start to bridge closer and closer, as you will see in our project that we built too. So what is our interest? So when we come to Thailand and we opened our firm like 2 years ago, we try to combine these three things together. The thing that good in our country, like Thai vernacular and tectonic, I want to combine it with what I learned there in London, the curvilinear and geometric computational design and with robotic fabrication. So here's a sample of the project that's being built now. We designed it with the landscape designer, terrain open space, Trop. We're using local material while enhancing local vernacular building, logic, and tectonic with computational design and digital fabrication. I will talk about this project later. So for Metaverse, I will talk about current application and future application of the digital twins and metaverse opportunity. So for current application, first, I will talk about generative sandbox. So because in metaverse, right, time there is much faster than in the real world. So a lot of utopia idea that cannot be tested in real world before it's getting built, because in the AEC industry, when you build something, it's very expensive and arduous job, right? So now you can build something, you can test multiple range of idea in a lot of words, right? In metaverse, it's like 1,000 layer of area that can be tested, right? So it's the time there is much faster because one simulation in your computer, maybe like one day, can be tested like 100 years in real world. So the key agents to investigate and incorporate in our design that we are doing right now, and also some example of other people in the world doing, is weather, material, environment, people, local condition, and profit. Okay, here for weather. In this simulation, they try to get the least heat on building, right? You can simulate a building, generate it to get the minimum heat radiation on the surface. On the second image is topology optimization. You can create a structure for high-rise building that can have the least material use, especially right now that you have COP26 going on. So maybe you want to build a high-rise tower with more green resort, right? And for environment, for example, you build a building, you can have view optimization, you can get maximum view to get to see the good view, for example. And those view maybe is a Central Park in Bangkok, let's say. You can have the room that have like 20% price, higher price than normal with the maximum thing. With machine learning, they can give you that result. And with people on that little screen on the left, people can adjust and create their own design to still look like us designing it. I will show you later on. And also local condition and profit, you can combine everything like building regulation, planning, and even feng shui there, and you get the result. And here is the example of how to use that as generative sandbox. This one is from Sahadi Design, it's the cloud master plan. For example, if you have the node of old city, you have part optimization to use the least amount of road surface area to create the city out of there, and that the building is, you can test the distort area that in metaverse, people can start living there and test that they like this kind of district or not. For example, this is really that efficient, something like that. And here is another project from KPF called Scout. Here you can test and adjust several possibility, right? This can help architect or project development in real estate company firm to test their ideas and feasibilities before buying certain land, let's say. Here you can see they can adjust the building and see the heat that changed in real time. And here is one of our project that we do a long time ago that this is a simulation process that you can generative planning for urban settlement or anything like that based on the any logic that you put into it. Okay, for mass customization, this project, my teacher Shajay will talk about it in details. So mass customization here, the thing that I'm going to talk about is user as a co-creation of the project, right? So now you're not confined to a repetitive and binary space anymore. So each person can have their own unique identity. And there are newly minted object of this thing can be sold as NFT too. Oh, sorry. And here is another example from nervous system. As you can see in these jewelries, right? You adjust the variable and they still look like the designer designing it and the price changed in real time, even the shipment. And these things can also be sold online like easily, right? And here is the latest example of Metaverse online platform of mass customization. The user can adjust the fashion and the materials, and you can use this as NFT to sell it as NFT here, or you can have a virtual fashion to use it for any online platform and gaming. And here is the prototype that we did for one of our project, that's continuous project to create a furniture, right? On the left side, you see that user adjust the variable and it still look like us designing it. And at the end, we 3D printed as a vest, so people can use it later on. So each design that user adjusts, right, is distinct. It's not going to be the same. Like all of us listen to this talk, right? We share the same gene, but we look different and we are different similarly here. And this is our project, the installation that we do for Bangkok Design Week, like 2 years ago or something. So here we do it with Thai and solution. We call it Thai tectonic metamorphosis. So we start to metamorph the typical, very famous Thai motif called like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but yeah, and here you can, we're playing with transformation metrics of those motif, right? The translation, rotation, and scale. So each column is here, like us, they have the same DNA, but with different variables, they look totally different. With the different input, different variables in the gene, they look different. And we also test with how to play with the technique of Thai design, the mirror one. We play with antagonists in mythology Ramayana to mirror it. And here we fabricate it with robotic fabrication, so we don't need a file when we design something. And later on, here is our installation there. So now come back to the architecture world. So for digital twin before construction, what do we use it for before construction? We use it for AR, augmented reality, to see project before it's getting built. It's very good for renovation and adaptive reuse. And also we use cloud platform to combine everything. We literally build something before it's getting built in physical world. And here is the project of student of my friend Sumin Ham in SciArt, I think. So now you can see that with the iPad and anything, AR can visualize it and design it in real time. It's very good for students in the university too, because they can adjust here, they can design it intuitively, especially from the young architects as they start to learn, right? They can tweak it with their hand, not just their mind, right? As you can see here, right, it starts to be a point cloud and create it. You can adjust it and co-design it in real time. Okay. So here is another project that we're doing for KJL Electric here in Thailand. So here is the render of the project, and here is the AR thing that the owner can see it from their phone. What it's going to be like when that thing getting built in their renovation project, right? So this is very good for them, and it's more intuitive for them to understand what is going to be built instead of the perspective that they're going to see. And here is the project that we designed with Trop that I just shared. It's in the center of Bangkok. So we use traditional Thai house as inspiration, and we make it into the three things that we just say. Like our why to do this is Thai vernacular ventilation logic, and how to do it differently with curvilinear design. So here, first, it's kind of like Thai house, right? It's a house on stilts, similar to traditional Thai house, and we have the terrace that have a void to let the wind pass through to make it a moderate climate and people can walk outside, and also the red roof. That is the highlight red on the right side. So the high pitch roof, but we smooth it. So high pitch roof make heat store on top of the roof, right? So people that use it at a lower space is have moderate climate, and also when water drain, it's drained much better. So here is the render of it. It's building right now. So we build it literally like this in virtual world with every person involved in the project, even the owners, contractor, and everything is here. So you can see that here you have AC, M&E, and structure and architecture in one file, everything in there. So it's very good for this curvilinear and complex building, but so you know what is going to be there, what the problems going to occur before it's getting built. Especially this area is the first floor drop-off area, right? So in this project, on the roof there has nothing. So every AC system, air conditioning system, is on the floor. It's heat radiant floor, right? So now it's very hard to sleeve the beam. So this is very easy way to convey the message to all the party involved. So we use the simulation that Fry Auto do, like tensile experiment, and we also have it here in Thailand too, but we didn't document it that well. It's called Senjom hair, right? So you can call it like as an algorithm is dynamic relaxation to get the minimal area, to get minimal surface, area to occupy space for the AC system. Here is the example of our simulation. You have all the AC machine below the beam, and now we simulate the ceiling to occupy for those space. And this ceiling use the least materials. So sometimes least materials doesn't have to be like rectilinear, right? Doesn't have to be rectangle. And here is the render of it. Here's everything that you can see. It's occupied everything in the floor. And everything combined, and we can see everything before it's getting built. Here you can see the roof, it has nothing except the white thing that is the structure. And here's the render that I'm sitting here too. Okay, so let's see that we have the thing before it's getting built. Now, when we're building it, what will it be? What the use of it will be, right? So it helps us build complex design with mixed reality, with HoloLens. And it's also compare and inspect architectural detail or advanced architectural details and structure. Here's the project from my friend again, Sumin Ham, designed the steampunk pavilion. They use mixed reality and HoloLens to help them steam bend the wood to have the shape of the pavilion, of the double curvature pavilion. So here you can see that all the coordinates here are there. So the workers know when at any angle they're gonna bend to put that things there. Like see there, right? The joint is there, how you're gonna bend it to use a joint, and when they assemble it, they know where to assemble it. So we use kind of this aspect in our project too. So here is another project of us. Okay, the slide is coming. Here's another project in Bangkok, in Nong Chok area, right? So it's the typical Thai house. We oriented with least exposure to sunlight, an angle toward the lake, and we extended one way and another way. One way is a terrace inside the lake, another way to be a drop off of the area. And we split the building to have a service building. So when they have maintenance occurs, not disrupt with people instead. So here is when they ventilate, right? So it's kind of like typical Thai house. So here's the site. It's a beautiful big site. It's the biggest Koh Nong Nai in Bangkok too. So here's the drop off area. We have the concrete block layering that is the Thai silk pattern, right? This talk is not about digital fabrication, so I'm not going to talk about how we're staggering it up. So here, when we inspect the site, you see that you can see the design overlaying with the thing that's construct, right? So we can say, yes, okay, we keep this kind of. You can see it's in the phone, you go there, walk around, you can see that everything's fine and you don't have to change anything. Here is the image. Here is the thing that we do for the service building too. We gradient it because we don't want people to see the laundry stuff or machine there. So it's kind of like partly obscure and partly letting the ventilation go through it. So here is the plan of the main building. And here you can see the structure of the building superimposed on the real thing that's get built. So we can say that, okay, our virtual world and real world start to merge literally. And here is the ceiling inside the house. Like in every room in this building have this double curvature roof. So we use it to inspect it. On the first video clip here, you inspect part of it, like you adjust the slider and it will decrease the amount and increase the amount of the wood there. And the second one, you can inspect the whole geometry of the roof. And this is the result there. It will finish this month, this house here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the future application and what is the future opportunity for Metaverse. It's going to be adaptive virtual environment. So like, as you see in the news right now, right? Normal NFT, that is architectural thing, will be a render of it, a 3D model of it. It's kind of like we sell the thing that is in our office and we sell it, right? So it's kind of like you sell the concept design, a conceptual model or something. And so we're interested about the self-assembly model in virtual world. I will talk about my thesis at AADRL too. We do self-assembly there. So architecture, since the beginning of profession Renaissance, is a passive profession, right? Like it's a one-way silo management from owner, architect, engineering, contractor, and everything and such. So now architecture will become active participant again. It will start to convey message, have their own behavior and interact with you. And these things at a certain time can be minted as NFT too. Okay, here is the example work from Theodore Spiro Barros Studio. He's a director of DRL and one of my tutor. And here you can see the self-assembly thesis here, right? So we designed a module that can interact and create a space of their own, like this human thing, right? It can create a space, allow around them. And here, when you change the space, it's changed the space in this, like you buy an NFT right now, you buy a house, you cannot, the house in virtual world doesn't align with the house in physical world, but with these things can allow this, can change the shape. If you buy it, if you live in a condominium, let's say 90 square meter, and you move it to the seaside villas, 200 square meter, right? These things can create a new experience, hybrid experience with you. Anywhere you go, it will adapt to the space that you be, unlike because the problem with the VR thing and everything is that when you walk to the edge of it, you're gonna hit something if the world is not alignment with what they're in virtual world, right? So what about in open space? In open space, this thing can change, adapt, and create something, even something that overhang, right? So now architect role will change from, we'll be designing the behavior of the discrete unit like this. You design how it's move, how it's aggregate. So, and we can also design the local and global rules of the system too, how it's going to aggregate like this, how it's going to come together in the open space, create an overhanging space that you see at the end of the clip here. Okay, here is create a columns, and here is come together to create a pavilion, right? For imagine if you have a HoloLens here, or if you have an AR phone, you can create a social project that everyone put together a piece and create their own piece in the space, right? And here is our thesis in ARDRL. We call it SWOT with a couple of my friends there. So we use machine learning, like we use genetic algorithm to create the building for us. Here we set the goal to have the least amount of unit there possible to get the geometry that get it out. So it's kind of like we design the algorithm and they find the right variable for certain conditions for us. And these things, as I will show you later about it's keep getting better and better here. It's used least and least material every generation. And here, for certain times, as learning process go, porosity increase, and these things can also sell as NFT too. And you can split with the platform owner and everything, and also the seller and everything, right? So here is similar to that thing. If you change the place, it's also change, right? And here is also adapt to the environment around it. If you have a flat face like this, or you have a slope, it will create like the staggering stairs like this. And if you have a river in the middle, it will create a bridge across the river for you too. Okay, about the space defining algorithm, we also designed a global system of how people traverse from A to B inside the building. We have three different paths there. It's kind of like when you do a Google map and using like avoiding tolls or something like that option. And here's the render of it. I will show you about the path soon. Okay, here. So here, as you can see in the top left, you can ask for intersect part is like when you traverse from A to B, right? Architecture will talk back to you now. We'll suggest you a route from A to B, and you see a lot of people, the most intersect thing from A to B. Shortest path is like, give me the farthest way from A to B. And less transformable path is kind of like, give you the least minimum energy from A to B, how you get there. And here the project from Sumit, my friend again. So here, if you imagine how they tell you from A to B, right? Is if you wear a HoloLens, maybe you have something occur in your lens that's told you, okay, follow this light. If you have a phone, maybe it's talk back to you, okay, follow this light. You can go from A to B and you meet with a lot of people, a lot of interesting things around you. And here is the final render of our thesis there when we have a thesis there. So now architecture can aggregate based on certain scenarios, right? It can be built in real world too with the fixed state. Like this thing, freeze, you can build it here. It's good for certain condition. And also architect will be a behavioral designer to design the governing and assembling rules of the architecture. So now you traverse from A to B with this spatial, as you can see here, that use least energy because this thing needs to transform to get you from A to B. That's why we have the option of least transformable path. So a truly hybrid experience encoded environment where architects become active participants right now. So to sum it up, for generative sandbox, you get the tabula rasa of a utopia simulation. For mass customization, you get discrete identity and functionality of user in your design. For digital twin before construction, you get precise information. For digital twin during construction, you get precise construction. An adaptive virtual environment will give you active and adaptive participant and hybrid experience. So with computational design and robotic fabrication, superimposed digital realm of metaverse will be seamlessly bridged with physical world. Man and machine will coexist in an encoded environment, where built environment become active participant in our everyday hybrid experience. Our life will not be the same anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Not. Thank you so much. It's quite an intense presentations you have. It's really eye-opening what we can do about it. Not we have questions from our peers from social media right here. Very interesting. What are the possibilities of Thai architecture in the metaverse?
I think for me, as we show in the project that we do that in the Bangkok Design Week, right? So I think we can showcase what we have. We have a lot of good identities that never shows. And we also always, let's say, do the same traditional things, right? Why don't a church or a temple be something else, similar to I don't know, like in Western way, like you can help improve it with computational design and push the possibilities of traditional design method and traditional motive forward. And also in the way we build things, right? The thing that I'm talking about, Senjong hair, right? Is the thing that we have like for 100 years and we never documented, but we travel to Spain to see Anthony Gaudi work, right? The hanging chain thing is actually the same logic, right? If we find what we have culturally and we encoded them, I think we can find something new out of there. Like what I said about emergent design, right? We can do a lot of emergent design technique with what we have here that is not well documented. We push the boundaries of our profession forward. That's what I'm thinking and what I really want to do here in Thailand too. I want to push for the new opportunities of possibilities of design methodology here in Thailand.
I guess we could also regenerate our heritage cultural architecture right back in the metaverse, so the future generation can understand better of the whole history we're talking about. Thank you.
Especially,
go ahead.
Sorry. I'm going to say that especially Shang Sip Mu, right? They have like very well-trained craftsmanship that never encoded and never have the proper way of transfer knowledge. So I think if you transfer that to a machine, like robotic fabrication that I'm talking about. Sadly, I don't have time to talk about that, how we use robot in our project, how we build it. I mean, if you encode all those 10 tribes of craftsmanship that we have here, we encode it with robot. Right now, we can dissipate this knowledge to every province in Thailand, let's say. And they will have equal opportunity to learn from the best, right? Because robot learn from those 10 craftsmanship, the best thing. And I think that will be very, very good for our heritage too. Yeah.
I think it's an awesome idea. I make sure I echo your thought to creative economy agencies right here in Thailand to do something about it and make sure that we can leverage or gain opportunities for this metaverse technology. Thanks, Nat. Thank you once again for spending time with us and staying up late for us. We'll hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, see you again soon.
For sure. Thanks. That's wonderful. I mean, that's quite intense. We're looking at how computational design reimagine architecture, engineering, and construction through the metaverse. The concept of digital twins has always fascinated me. And of course, this technology itself is not a new, but the context of how it can be used is ever evolving. Just as the vision for the metaverse is a bridge between the physical world and the virtual worlds, digital twins are too. So these proxies of physical world can lead to new collaboration opportunities. among physical world experts and data scientists whose jobs are to understand and decode data into new knowledge. And doing just that, while closing out our session, the final speaker of our two-day forum is Sajay Bhushan, who will be talking to us about the metaverse and urban transformation, participatory architecture, online and on land. Hello, Sajay.
Hello.
Good afternoon to you. I believe you're based in UK, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
Welcome and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thanks you for joining us today. We're really excited to hear more about your talk today, participatory architecture, how it actually leads to urban transformation and how it's actually linked to metaverse. Sajay, if you are ready, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks to Translucia for having me and providing the opportunity to listen to so many wide variety of contributors from different walks of life and different disciplines. I think that this kind of transdisciplinary conversation is very much an important feature of making progress globally. So I'm going to talk about metaverse and how we can channel the energy and enthusiasm that is in the metaverse domain and also Web 3.0 to enhance and sustain the physical world. So my background is I work for Zaha Hadid Architects, and my background is in computational design, and I feel very fortunate to have a ringside view of the leading professional research and academic arenas for architectural technologies. And we definitely believe the metaverse and Web 3.0 has significant architectural underpinnings. And so I work professionally for Zaha Hadid Architects, and I also nurture creative capital working with younger generation of students and new researchers at the Architectural Association Design Research Lab. And I'm also trying to enhance my scientific tooling aspects at the ETH in Zurich. So what this kind of broad contact with various kinds of institutions and people gives me is the idea that if we were to natively digitally architect the metaverse, we need to consider two main things. One is the interplay between technology and user experience and narrative, like the first two speakers, like Jeremy and Oliver, touched upon this aspect as well. And the second main aspect of the metaverse and Web 3.0 is the idea of participation and consensus, that it is voluntary transactions and voluntarily incentivized, and how do you incentivize cooperation, collaboration, and so on. So the technology of consensus, technology of cooperation mixed with technology of customized experiences that we believe is the underlying principles of if we were to natively architect the metaverse. And as it turns out, these aspects are also persistent with real life architecture and urbanism, and our cities ought to have these ideas that the user experience should be taken care of, and so cities don't just happen to be places that were designed for cars and we just happen to inhabit them, cities and architecture have to be focused on enhancing and providing meaningful and productivity enhancing experiences. So that is one particular aspect that transfers over, whether it is metaverse or real life architecture and urbanism. And the other aspect as well is that transfers over is the idea of community and consensus, that you shouldn't coerce people into doing things, and we should assume that we can incentivize as far as possible and also allow for consensus to emerge. And so these two aspects we believe transfer over between online metaverse type of spatial design, but at the same time, similarly, it's highly relevant for the physical world as well. And And I'm going to talk more about the second part, like, and the first part, I will just briefly hint, like, so these are our real world projects that we are currently doing, like that's on my small teams, like that we are contributing to at Zadid Architects. By the way, 2 of these are actual photographs. The rest are computer generated imagery. But you can see that like we pay the same amount of attention like to realistically visualize things, because like we are extremely focused on user experience, whether it is in real life spaces as well. So like we believe that our architecture has to enhance user experience. It has to provide meaningful well-being experiences. And at the same time, like we are trying to bring this kind of ethos to the design of virtual spaces. This is a gallery that we designed for virtual art for the Miami Art Basel event that happened last month. And we can see that like even here, particularly in the metaverse, like everything is going to be about enhancing user experiences, because otherwise you will end up with ghost towns that nobody will want to visit, and because it is not doing anything productive for their lives. So and so like moving on to the other aspect, which is how do you nurture communities and consensus in cyberspace in anticipation of its sustainable physical realization, right? Like, so that's what I'm going to really talk about. How do you go from online to on land, and maybe later we can also go backwards. This is not particularly a new idea. We at the Design Research Lab and Zadid Architects have been kind of talking about this for at least the last 20 years, that like the web is a fantastic place to create community, which is then spatially hosted. Like typically like communities like Facebook are like just hosted within a web page, but now we can think about websites like truly spatial hosting of communities. And as Jeremy and Oliver also mentioned, like it's a very important part of our navigation apparatus. Like we as human beings naturally aligned with or evolved to navigate in 3D space. So we've been talking about these ideas for a long time, and now people are talking about it like even more, like at a much larger scale. So how can the internet be hosted spatially, like a spatial web? And also what's interesting is like there's increasing recognition that all of the technology that is needed is already here, and we need to just connect them together and make use of it and create meaningful applications. And so that's where I'm going to talk about like how video game worlds coupled with like fun and scientific computer graphics and computer geometry could and then later on coupled with physical robotic means of production can actually lead to solutions to this. What do we mean by that? Like the built environment just happens to happen to all of us. Like it has tremendous impact on our everyday lives, our well-being and so on, but a majority of the people have zero impact on the decisions of when to build, how to build, where to build, how much to build, etc. So as a consequence, what happens is that buildings become quickly unloved and they need to be demolished. And when you demolish, like you make a problem much worse, because like it releases even more carbon into the environment, because buildings cost a lot of carbon to make in the first place. So it's very important that we figure out a solution to continued use of buildings and not just tear things down all the time. So and part of the contributing factor is to think about buildings as cars and cities as machines. This was like dominating principles or ethos in 20th century architecture, where automation and universality was superseding all other concerns. And this led to like the ideas of the automobile city, like which obviously will lead to more sprawl because cars can move more easily, and very low density cities. And furthermore, it made matters worse that like from public perception, people thought like dense cities like these are actually bad cities. Like these cities fell out of favor, like in favor of cities like Atlanta But reality bears a completely opposite evidence. Sprawl consumes more resources. It leads to more isolation, mental problems, more physical resources, heating, and so on. And you can see here that Atlanta, for the same population, has an order of magnitude more carbon footprint. And so it's perhaps time to rethink buildings are for people and cities are as hosts, and kind of focus on material and energy conservation, adaptability, and well-being rather than automation and universality, which is a dominant feature in 20th century architecture. So we believe like 3 things need to change and to make this happen. And one of the change is like who decides how things are built and how big, and how do we govern this? How do we govern the built environment? And so this is where we believe like games have a significant role to play, because the world currently has about 3 billion gamers, which is almost half the world already. And so what is particularly interesting about games is that it represents users. Like you would be surprised to know, significant part of computer-aided design software do not represent users. It represents the physical world, and it represents materials, it represents buildings, but it doesn't represent users. So games, on the other hand, fundamentally represent users. They're built around users. And also it represents user choice, which is another thing like typically computer-aided design software do not represent. And so we've been using at the Design Research Lab, like doing a lot of research around adapting games, game engines, and game technologies for architectural use, particularly for democratizing whatever the profession learns and improves. Like how do you democratize advances in architecture to a wider audience? And so these are some of the kind of speculative investigation that we've been doing, and we can see that like as a consequence of these 2 aspects of users being represented and also user choice being represented, we can create literally millions of options, and everybody could potentially have their own ways to configure their space. Change 2, what is change 2 that needs to happen? Like is how we design and how we build. It's very clear that like for at least the last century, we favored automation and universality, and in the process created like materially wasteful ways to design and to build. And so here we believe like, again, technologies from the computer graphics world, which is rapidly evolving, can combined with robots have a significant role to play. One of the ways that we can learn through ancient geometry, ancient wisdoms is that like arranging materials in curved formats like arches, like walls, like domes, is actually a material conserving property, because curvature is stronger than like flat things. And even more particularly, if you arrange material along a certain geometric pattern like these bricks, it will further help us save material. Because like you're gaining strength through the geometric properties rather than like material properties. So which means you can use lower strength material and lower energy material. And incidentally, this ancient wisdom is actually very much aligned with very modern technologies of 3D printing, which is very popular or increasingly becoming popular across the world. And so recently what we did was combine these 2 ideas of like ancient wisdom of unreinforced masonry, which every culture does have, and is now being enhanced by the Block Research Group in ETH Zurich, where I'm doing the PhD, and create this kind of prototype for a bridge. There is very little steel in this, very little. It's mostly concrete, and there's very little concrete too, because most of these bricks are hollow, and on top of it, like these geometric properties allows for us to speculate and also really demonstrate that we can reduce the amount of material used, concrete and cement, cement and steel. We can reuse all of these blocks because there is no glue. It is dry assembled. You can take them apart and repair them and replace them and so on. So reduce, reuse, recycle is very much possible by combining ancient wisdom with modern day technologies of both geometry and robots. And so the same principles are now being adapted into building floor slabs by the Block Research Group. And what is important to know here is that 40% of the weight of a building is in the floor slab. So, and if from that, if you can remove 70% of concrete and 90% of steel, you can do the math that we're definitely going to achieve a impactful impact on the kind of conservation, material conservation, and responsible design. So a slightly related use of this is like change 2.0 or 2 prime, let's say. How do we transfer this disciplinary advance, like from the research domain, from the high-end design practices like Zadi the architects, to like make it more widely available? How can we make this, address like the 3 billion gamers that we do have, and the next generation of designers and the next generation of consumers who are growing up on Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, and also games are low threshold entry points for more serious applications, as several previous speakers have said. And so what we are now trying to do is take this highly intelligent, evolved research and development, which is not only material saving, but also user experience enhancing, like this math gallery that we designed like 5 years ago, that already attracts 1 million visitors for a gallery for mathematics every year, because it's clear that it is user enhancing, apart from experience enhancing, apart from material conserving, and so on. And so how do we transfer this into the virtual and make it available in this kind of game environments? Can we make it available to multiple millions of citizens, let's say, of the virtual world? So not only can architects like develop these kind of spaces which are engaging and which are communicative and highly information rich and interaction rich, but like without having to go through the several decades of training and research that like we have done. So what we are doing is encoding and distributing this design knowledge in easy to use CAD tools, which could be part of like a game engine like Minecraft or Roblox, which so not only do to have the benefits of something like Lego, but with like something that is more advanced and material saving and user and experience enhancing. So we are packaging these things up like so that users can readily use them within these kind of easy CAD environments. And not only the geometry, not only the complex shapes, but also like presets for spatial organizations, because this is also expertise that is usually a domain of the architects and space designers. Why not make them more widely available? So why not like raise the standards of design to easy gamified interface? So we are working on these aspects, and in the sense that we want to combine all these three aspects. First, we want participation and consensus. We want good design and easy to use tools. And sustainable building parts to be put in front of the various consumers like well ahead of time, before having to make the decision of making the building, right? Like, and so in the hope that one size needn't fit all, we can address various demographics, their economic resources, their social resources, and so on, and the stage of life they might be in, and create an architecture and urbanism that is aligned with the people that it is meant to serve, and whose lives it is meant to enhance. And on the other hand, like computational design also has the flexibility, as not suggested, that if the demographic changes, if their lifestyle changes, if like they're in a different stage of life or a different type of community, we can reconfigure some of these parameters in the way they use spaces, and like we can result in another type of architecture and different kinds of spaces. So one style needn't fit all either. So combined together, like we are trying to prototype these in the real world, like which I will end with a few slides of this real world project where we as architects are developing systems whereby users can play around and like take the decisions that is more meaningful to them, whereas architects and system designers can take care of the more expert side of things, like organizing, taking care of solar performance or shading, etc. So it is adapted to the terrain and like things which are difficult in the Lego world. So architects are we are trying to do that, and also design for more choice, like not only one size fits all. Like what happens if the user select the middle 3 pixels? Can we give them an option of the central house, or the house with the peripheral balconies, house with greater views, double height houses, and so on and so on. So, and this obviously means a whole lot more work for the design team. And so again, the technologies from the metaverse really enhance this kind of thinking, that we can design as a system rather than the one-off. And also then make available all these combinatorial possibilities. Like it's not just one house, but like a kit of parts that can come together in various combinations, and also hold surprise, so people can customize it to their needs and their budgets, and who their neighbors are, and whether they want to be on the ground floor or on the top floor, etc. And so this is the work that we are doing as architects and engineers, such that, and also we are thinking about like how we can import like just simple robots and work with local labor and local material, local timber, in this case tropical pine, so that we are not shipping large houses, like which is usually the case in prefabricated housing, that like you ship big houses full of air like around the globe. And here we are trying to work with local skilled craftspeople and enhance their skills, and with digital means and also local materials. So we also know how we can transfer local materials into the house, and there also reduce transportation costs, both environmentally and financially. So, and here's what the users need to do, like, which is to not worry about any of that. Like they can worry about like who they want to live with, what size of house they want, where they want it, and they can also negotiate with their neighbors, like whether they want to share part of their house for part of the time, or co-invest in communal utility function, utility spaces, etc. So, and again, here the user experience of the choice that they're making is very, very important. Typically, users have zero experience of architectural spaces. They see a drawing and they don't really can visualize like what is the decision that they're making. So again, games really enhance this kind of immersive aspect of like a very, very important decision in people's life. Like they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a house. So again, games is simplifying this making it very intuitive. And so these are all the choices that they made, and they're negotiating as we speak right now on resolving the conflicts. Like some people want the same voxels or same pixels. So they're negotiating that, and amongst various other things. So, and so in this way, not only can people customize their own houses, but they can also customize the overall layout of which building is next to which, whose house is next to who, and how much is the view in each house, and like and so on. So clearly, it's one of those consensual developments which we are now piloting with only 10 houses. But we're very confident that like once these 10 houses are really materialized by the second quarter of 2023, we can really then kind of transform and deploy this at much larger scale, so that we can shift the focus from automation and universality to responsible lifestyles, and we can genuinely channel the energy and enthusiasm of the metaverse and games and Web 3.0 to enhance and sustain the physical world. And again, we can think back and say like the success of the car was not so much only about the technology of the assembly line and so on, but the fact that it became a very central part of the lifestyle of the 20th century. Everybody wanted to own a car because the cities were bigger and bigger. And so the only way you could get anywhere were if you had a car, and top of it had a social connotation of being socially accepted. And so what we want to do through games, through these participatory technologies, empower the next generation, to educate them, to enable them, and to create responsible environments, responsibly design new environments, And so we are already involved in a couple of these efforts, like one is in Roatan in Honduras that I just spoke about, and where if beyond the first 10 houses, we want to get to this state where we have building multiples of houses in these kind of collaborative, consensual way. And we're also involved in the so-called cyber Liberland aspects, which is a metaverse for a small community of like-minded people who want to spatially host themselves and engage in communal interaction and so on. And we hope in 2022, our efforts in this space will only increase, and we will also have increasing number of collaborators join us on this journey. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ajay. It's a very insightful session. Well, when it comes down, to wrap up the whole session for the 2 days journeys of us here, what excites you the most about the actualizations of the metaverse?
One of the key things that excites us in the metaverse is the Cambrian explosion, right? That there is so much energy, so much experimentation, and of course some of them will fail and some of them will mutate, but the amount of energy and enthusiasm in that space is deeply how do you say, addictive, and also infectious, let's say, and so we believe that that is a very good sign that something very positive will come out of it. Of course, there are things to watch out for, as some of the speakers already spoke about. But it is genuinely exciting that there's so much experimentation, and that we can. And the second part that really excites us is that a lot of the things that we've been doing in the physical world, in the way we design our architecture, like the technical tools, and also the intellectual thinking, the mindset is so aligned with the metaverse. So we want to engage with the newer generations, but also onboard our current generation of clients and society to engage in these kind of discursive aspects as well. So both these aspects are deeply exciting.
We are totally looking forward to. Thank you so much, Ajay, for joining us today.
Yeah, we're welcome. Thanks again for having me.
Have a wonderful day. We'll hope to see you again somewhere in Metaverse. Thank you. Well, this is wonderful and totally a pump-up session for 2 days straight. Well, this is not every day that we get to hear from such diverse and distinguished speakers in one sitting. The concept of Metaverse is more than an immersive experience. It's not just a social media, but it's all about social, technological, economic, environmental, regulatory, and value-based aspects. The spectrum is wide, a space is filled with new opportunity. Various industries can be found within this space, from brands, entertainment, fashion, gaming, education, environment, healthcare, architecture, to policies, and everything in between. I hope that your curiosity has been quenched and been awakened at the same time. So many of my questions have been answered. But now, I have even more questions. Some questions are more present, such as, what does a completely open and interoperable system would look like? What are the key characteristics within this space? Decentralization, centralizations. What other questions are more like a thought experiment, such as, what earthbound theories could the metaverse dispel? There are countless avenues of investigation that we could be all part of. And I would like to invite you to continue these discussions by sounding off in the comments, posting on social media platforms, or even tweeting us over Translucia social medias and portals. Let us collectively forge ahead and envision a place where imagination becomes reality. The place everyone is dreaming for. Thank you again to our distinguished speakers and you, the audience, for joining us on a 2-day journey. We will plunge headfirst into the unknown in the form of words from our expert speakers, guided skillfully by their knowledge and insight to our destination. The work has only just begun. I invite you to join us to envision Translucia as the bridge between the real and the virtual worlds, where we can drive positive impacts that matter to all. Let us focus on purpose and legacy, and on exchanging goodness into prosperity, wellness, and ultimately happiness. Goodbye for now. Until next time.